Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode 801 for the 11th of February 2024. Richard Saunders here, coming to you once again from beautiful downtown Oakland, California. Now, before I get stuck into the show and what's coming up, today, if you're in the Bay Area, today being here in the United States, Saturday the 10th of February, I will be appearing at the Berkeley Public Library at 1 p.m. and I'll be giving a talk on behalf of with the Bay Area Skeptics. It's a hangout. They call it a hangout. And I'll be talking about how to make a podcast. I think I've had a bit of experience. In fact, the blurb says, hang out with Richard Saunders. The secrets behind a skeptical podcast. Richard Saunders, host of the Skeptic Zone podcast for 17 years, takes you behind the scenes of how a typical podcast is created each week, from conducting interviews and gathering information to the actual recording and editing. This is a chance for you to be part of a live recording of this well-known podcast. Well, there you go. So if you're in the area today, being the 10th of February here in the United States, come along to the Berkeley Public Library at 1 p.m. or before 1 p.m. to take your seat. More information at baskeptics.org. And indeed, later on today, during that live demonstration or that live lecture, I will be interviewing the one and only Dr. Eugenie Scott. But coming up on this week's show, we're going to kick off with my report from the latest foray into the world of the weird and the strange and the very weird and the very strange MindBodySpirit, MindBody Wallet, an article I wrote for the Skeptic magazine in Australia called Swings and Roundabouts. And this time I go into more detail about some of the crazy devices and contraptions. Say that 6 times quickly. Devices and contraptions. I don't even know if I've got that right. We have discovered at MindBody Wallet over the years. From the benign to what we consider to be potentially dangerous. Some machines that actually don't do anything, but the promises they make can be dangerous because they can't fulfill those promises. I think you'll understand once you hear my report. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics, and read that report fresh off the press and hundreds of others when you get the Skeptic magazine throughout the year. Head to skeptics.com.au to sign up. After that, Susan Gerbeck takes the show over and she interviews from the West Virginia Skeptics Society, Daniel Reed. And Daniel Reed has done a very interesting thing. Will I tell you, or will I wait for you to hear? He's had a day declared. A day declared for skeptics? Sort of a fascinating interview coming up as Susan Gerbeck chats to Daniel Reed. Then following that in the Trove segment, we focus on Doris Stokes. She died many years ago in the 1980s, but she was a major media psychic for a while around the 1980s, the early 1980s. She was big in Australia, very big in Britain, and I think she was the forerunner to people like John Edward and James Van Praagh and Sylvia Browne and so forth. We'll look into her, what references we can find to Doris Stokes in the Trove segment. Now here's some good news for those people going to the Skepticamp. The Skepticamp on the Surf Coast. A wonderful place to be, Aries Inlet. And this is on the 24th, Saturday the 24th of February. And those people in Victoria certainly know where Aries Inlet is along the Surf Coast. It's a wonderful place just near Anglesea, which is a beautiful, beautiful little town. What I like about Anglesea, here's a tangent. I was visiting there with my good friend Michelle Bickersma and Steve Roberts just before the pandemic to go to Skepticamp. And it was in February in Australia which can be stinking hot, but the nights were so cool I had to reach for the electric blanket. And I thought, that's pretty good. That's pretty civilized. Anyway, getting back to Skepticamp, it's just been announced, but their special guest via satellite internet, who knows what, a video feed with Brian Dunning and myself from Oregon. We'll be beaming into Skepticamp, and people can ask Brian all about UFOs and his movie and what he does, and they might ask me about, making origami or maybe some skepticism. Anyway, find out more. There is a link in this week's show notes to Surf Coast Skepticamp 2024, Saturday the 24th of February in beautiful Aries Inlet. And finally, a little note. Last week I mentioned that a listener had discovered the video series Healers, Quacks or Mystics, as shown on the ABC television in Australia in the early 1980s. I've had a chance to watch a little bit of that. It's gobsmacking. It's outrageous. It's amazing what they would show on television once upon a time, and still do, really, sadly, in many respects. The episode where there's a faith healer, a psychic surgeon, is just unbelievable. I'm so glad that we know, some of us know better these days. When you see the shonk, the scam, the con, the lie of a psychic surgeon pretending to open up the flesh and remove organs or at least create a lot of blood, it's just mind-snapping. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, open the fridge, and have a donut Kit Kat. A donut-flavored Kit Kat. There's a story behind that. While I do that, I hope you enjoy The Skeptic Zone. Swings and roundabouts. Richard Saunders reports on the fortunes and pitfalls of that merry-go-round of wellness, mind, body, spirit. In October 2023, Tim Mendham, Dr. Sue Ieraci and myself took the long and crooked road to the Festival of MindBodySpirit, MBS, held at the Convention Centre in Sydney's Darling Harbour. As long-time readers and listeners of this magazine know full well, this was not our first trip into the gates of ignorance and empty claims. I, for one, have been a regular visitor for over 20 years. What made this trip different was the chance to get media coverage of our adventure and put the skeptical point of view to more people. More on this later. For those unfamiliar with the Festival of MBS, the promoters describe it as, quote, Australia's largest health, well-being and natural therapies event, end quote. It is essentially a trade show for all things alternative. The list of exhibitors runs from the benign, such as hot sauces, teas, ginger beer, other foods, also jewellery and clothing, to the decidedly dodgy psychics and therapists. Over the decades, we have seen no end of products, many of which are flash in the pans, but also many of which are, in our opinion, a potential danger to the public. Despite all this, our mantra has always been that any self-respecting skeptic should make the trek to this event at least once. We always encourage readers to get off their armchairs. The various cures and treatments on offer over the years have been breathtaking and alarming, but we'll single out two of particular concern with regards to the claims about preventing, treating, and even curing cancer. Products on sale. In 2015, we discovered One Answer to Cancer, a documentary on DVD being sold that advocates the use of a salve to treat skin cancer. According to the blurb collected from the booth at the time, quote, "This is a story about two cancer salves. One makes cancer worse and can even kill, yet it is legal. The other has been curing cancer for 2,000 years, yet it is illegal, denounced by big pharma, big government, and big medicine. Those words were in caps. Why? So they can hang on to their obscene profits. The information in this DVD could save your life. It could save the lives of countless others as well." End quote. Conspiracy theories are nothing new in the world of the New Age. The product being espoused here was black salve, a highly toxic and corrosive agent that has led to severe facial disfigurements. According to the Australian Journal of General Practice, quote, "Black salve continues to be used by many people in the community, with treatment often being self-initiated without formal medical assessment or advice. Catastrophic consequences can occur. The sale of black salve in Australia is illegal." End quote. The DVD includes instructions on how to make this salve at home. A 2019 report in the Sydney Morning Herald about fake cancer cures quotes the TGA, Therapeutics Goods Administration. Quote, "As it is corrosive, people using black salve may be left with significant damage to their skin and tissue," end quote, the TGA said, adding that Plant Essentials has been prohibited from advertising the product. A second product we saw back in 2009 was the SE Scalar Energy Quantum Pendant from Fusion XL that was being sold at the event. This disc, about the size of a poker chip, could be worn around the neck as a pendant, with claimed health benefits including the ability to destroy viruses and bacteria, reversing cancer, and, as the representative told me, the pendant could be placed under a jug of tap water, turning the tap water into sunblock. This was an outrageous and dangerous claim, especially given the high rate of melanoma in Australia, and we sincerely hope nobody took this advice. I was under the distinct impression that the woman making the claim sincerely believed it, mentioning that she put this now charged water on her grandchildren to protect them from the sun. No matter how stupid the claim, there will always be someone who believes it. In 2016, the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency issued a warning on the pendants as, quote, "Wearing pendants continuously has the potential to give elevated skin dose due to beta radiation exposure," end quote. You can read about some of the nonsensical claims via an archived version of the Fusion XL website from 2008. tinyurl.com Fusion MBS. If nothing else, the fact that these two products were available at MBS shows that, in those years at least, the organizers were not doing their due diligence or duty of care to ensure the bona fides of the products and services being offered. We would argue that this is still the case in 2023, with services like iridology still on offer, let alone the varied psychic services and the fake devices to protect your home from negative energies. Bad tech. But maybe the greatest danger, it seems to us, are the many devices and modalities seen over the years that more or less claim to be able to diagnose bodily conditions and ailments, despite any weasel-worded disclaimers, such as, quote, "may help with," end quote, or, quote, "people report that," end quote. The bottom line here is that these devices and modalities cannot diagnose bodily conditions and possible illnesses. Very bluntly, they cannot detect early signs of cancer or anything else. They are based on pseudoscientific ideas, magical thinking, and what equates to a form of cold reading. That is, the practitioner gaining and imparting information in much the same way a tarot card or tea leaf reader does. Being diagnosed by these methods by medically unqualified people is a waste of money at best. At worst, it could mean a deadly delay in getting a real diagnosis. The so-called diagnostic claims range from the aforementioned iridology, the false and frankly long since debunked claim of being able to diagnose bodily functions via the patterns of the iris, to muscle testing, known as applied kinesiology, also long since debunked. See YouTube, Applied Kinesiology, how it's done, to machines and devices that would be the envy of Dr. Bones McCoy from Star Trek. In other words, they come from science fiction. Focusing on the various machines, we must conclude that the inventors of these devices, often in the form of computer programs run on laptops or fancy-looking boxes with wires and gauges, prey on the ignorance of the practitioners, such as naturopaths, who buy these expensive machines and or invest in the training. Naturopaths are the people we have often seen at MBS, charging whatever the market will bear for what we consider to be non-existent services. They themselves appear to lack the basic scientific or medical understanding which might protect them from being taken in by slick snake oil salesmen. Chief among these machines seen over the last decade has been the Metatron NLS, non-linear scanning. One of the various examples of so-called bioresonance scanners. This takes the form of a laptop running a program that displays animations of bodily organs as if they were in the process of being scanned. Again, we think of Star Trek. The origin of the Metatron seems to be from something called the Institute of Practical Psychophysics in Russia. We can imagine the scene as someone, possibly in Russia, put together this program using graphics out of an anatomy database, added lots of checkboxes and animations to create something that looks as if it is really a medical device, good enough to fool their target audience. The Metatron falsely claims to be able to detect, measure and display bodily electromagnetic fields, bodily organs, DNA, pathogens and even parasites, and then somehow rebalance or zap these to restore health. Previous investigations have shown not only that the purported measurements are fake, but the data produced on the screen is generated from computer programs and not necessarily connected to the electrodes that the unsuspecting customer is asked to hold, or, as was the case with former Skeptics President Iran Sagev, who was diagnosed with a Metatron in 2015, wear a set of headphones connected to a laptop. Sagev needed to sign a disclaimer of sorts, unlikely to be of any legal value, that had checkboxes reading, check, client declaration and waiver of liability for use of NLS, nonlinear scanning, Metatron system. And I have decided of my own volition to undertake the NLS health check willingly. Check. I accept full responsibility for my health and voluntarily complete this waiver of liability. Check. I certify that I am seeking NLS therapy for personal reasons only. Check. I certify that I am not representing any governmental agency in any capacity. Check. I certify that I am not representing any law firm. Check. I certify that I am not involved in a lawsuit, nor am I gathering information for a pending lawsuit. Check. I accept that no promise of cure or any curative effect has been given and may not necessarily occur. We feel it is important for readers to gain a better understanding of just how absurd this device is, and unsurprisingly, there are a series of YouTube videos we can point to. We remind you that these videos are not spoofs or send-ups. The first video, in particular from Vivacious Living Centre in Western Australia reinforces our point that those who buy and use the Metatron seem to believe it really works, as they appear to lack the basic scientific or medical understanding that would protect them from this sham. As you'll see in the video embedded on the page, the practitioner seems to repeat the nonsense undoubtedly told to her, including that NASA uses this device on returning astronauts. And there are 3 URLs mentioned. The first one is tinyurl.com/ym39jpy5. The second one is on YouTube, and that is capital X, capital T, lowercase l, 4, KNG, uppercase S, uppercase Y, 2, lowercase w. And the last one on YouTube again, lowercase pw, uppercase r, lowercase k, 2, lowercase n, uppercase u, uppercase w, lowercase oc, 4. Those we encountered using this device at MindBodySpirit were Danuta Helajko, and I trust I have pronounced that correctly. I don't want to make any gain here by mispronouncing a name I'm not familiar with. Master Naturopathy, I guess. SC Dip Bot Med Dip Nut, who, when last seen at MindBodySpirit 2018, was last based in Menai, Sydney, but has since moved her practice to Moss Vale, New South Wales. The current website of her practice mentions the specialised test. We suspect this is the Metatron owing to, as we'll discuss later, a government crackdown on these devices. An archived page from 2018 does list the device at her practice, and that can be found at tinyurl.com/28ndhbb8. Philippe Tebord, and again, apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly, ND, ANTA, naturopath, homeopath from Double Bay, Sydney. Although his current website does not mention the device, an archived page from 2018 does, and that's at tinyurl4m2a8tpp. Attached to the device, used by Danuta Helajko in 2015, was a sort of a holder into which could be placed a small bottle of water. This bottle then would be treated by vibrations from the device, based on one's diagnosis, to turn the water into a homeopathic remedy, an instant treatment. It sounds just as ridiculous as it looked. "Why isn't it used in hospitals?" we asked. "It is, in Russia," was the reply. The Therapeutic Goods Administration cracked down on false advertising for these bioresonance gadgets in 2019. A list of prohibited and restricted representations was published, including conditions from cancer to autism. The full list is available here. It's a tiny URL again. It is Y2TM6RWB. So, can we claim some good news for science, reason, and the public? For what it's worth, I think we can. At least at MindBodySpirit, these machines are no longer to be found. We must wonder, however, how many people received bogus health reports over the years. Media coverage. As mentioned at the beginning of this report, this year was different as, before heading into the event, Tim, Sue and I met with Selena Ribeiro, Guardian Australia's assistant editor for features, culture and lifestyle. Our concerns were plainly made in an interview over the space of 30 minutes, as we pointed out some of the above-mentioned products and services. The feeling among the skeptics as we left the meeting was very positive, with hopes of a soon-to-be-published story outlining our concerns. Alas, this was ultimately not the case, with the feature published a week later glossing over any real concerns we had, labelled us as, quote, a small band of self-professed skeptics, end quote, and a group that meets in a pub. The report was lightweight, more of a lifestyle piece, and even put a non-critical spin on our concerns. Readers can form their own opinion about the Guardian report. Another tiny URL, and that is 2E5Z32A6. We did find one section of the Guardian report informative. Quote, Exhibitions and Events Australia, which runs the MindBodySpirit Festival, told Guardian Australia that it discusses with exhibitors and speakers in detail what they'll be promoting. We do our due diligence, investigating websites and social media to ensure we do not permit anyone into our festival claiming they can cure certain ailments, the company said, end quote. Claiming they can cure certain ailments? Cancer? What about all the other conditions they claim to be able to diagnose? What about the claims of being able to protect against 5G or other electromagnetic radiation with nothing more than resin blocks? What about the claims of energy healing? Where do they draw the line? But taking the long view, we have noticed a considerable decrease over the past 5 or so years in the number of outright shonks and scams when it comes to nonsensical machines such as the Metatron, and, if the organisers are true to their word, a weeding out of cancer claims. Could it be that the world is becoming more aware of the utter nonsense peddled at MindBodySpirit for decades? We certainly hope so. Note, this report incorporates comments and additions from Dr. Sue Ieraci. And that was Swings and Roundabouts. Richard Saunders reports on the fortunes and pitfalls of that merry-go-round of wellness, mind, body, spirit. And that story was featured in the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics, volume 43, number 4 from December 2023. And you can subscribe to that magazine and read that report for yourself as well as many others by visiting www.skeptics.com.au and subscribing.
Hello, everyone out there. Thank you for coming to our service.
Yes.
We are ready to heal you. We are Ross and Carrie. We are faith healers. Yes, you there.
Yes, sir. You have a spirit of
not listening to enough podcasts.
We have the solution for that.
Oh, we can cure you.
You should listen to Oh No, Ross and Carrie. Hallelujah. It's on Maximum Fun.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you there. Gladys.
A spirit of boredom?
Oh my goodness, we have the solution for you. It is to listen to the podcast,
Oh No, Ross and Carrie.
I think we need to think. Here's Susan Gerbic.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
We've got Daniel Reed on the line, folks. This is a treat. Daniel Reed runs
The West Virginia Skeptics Society.
So this is a new group that he has started in West Virginia in the United States of America. We're going to talk about two different things today. He has written an article for Skeptical Inquirer about something that he did. It is called From Idea to Proclamation, Making Critical Thinking Awareness Day a Reality, published as a special article for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, Daniel A. Reed, January 29th, 2024. And then we're going to talk about that very briefly. I really want to get into a different discussion with you called No, Psychics and Mediums Are Not the New Therapists. And this is an article you wrote for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, November 1st, 2023. Let's talk about this Proclamation Day. Can you give listeners some
Well, I started looking around and I noticed that critical thinking, which I feel is very important to our society and to for individuals as well. I think that it's something that we should embrace and celebrate, and it should be part of our mission as the West Virginia Skeptics Society is to advocate for critical thinking and to advocate for its use in our everyday lives. And so I looked, and there was no acknowledgement that critical thinking was being celebrated anywhere. You have National Talk Like a Pirate Day, and you have things of that nature. But I thought, okay, so why? Let's look for something along the lines of critical thinking, and I found nothing. So I started to look into some of these websites where you can get a national day declared, and but like the National Talk Like a Pirate Day, but they didn't really have the gravitas that I was looking for. It wasn't you pay a fee, you get the day registered on this website, and huzzah, that's the day. But there's nothing official about it. And so I really wanted to look into something that was more of an official proclamation. And I got to looking into how one requests proclamations from the government. And so I came across some fairly simple, straightforward ways for folks to petition their governor of their state to have a day declared. And so as long as that day, but generally as long as it is something that's for the common good, that it's not used for any sort of commercial purpose or process, and it doesn't involve anything that's controversial, such as, you can't specifically have a day dedicated to a certain religion or something like that, then pretty much as long as you provide some good rationale, they will grant your request. And so I petitioned the governor, and a few months later, I had the proclamation signed, sealed, and delivered. I chose February 15th because that particular day, it coincides with National Public Science Day.
That's fantastic. So this was a proclamation by Governor Jim Justice at the great state of West Virginia. And from what I understand, this is something that you will have to request every year. It's not like something that will be etched in stone somewhere. It's something.
Right.
Let's talk psychics. Totally changing to a different hat. You wrote this article called No, Psychics and Mediums Are Not the New Therapists. And you wrote that because I was interviewed in an article for Elle magazine back in October of 2023. And then I was on Kenny Biddle's Skeptical Help Bar. And in a discussion I was having with Kenny about therapy and psychics, you were listening and you decided to write this article. Now, tell me quickly and tell the audience quickly, why do you have any credentials whatsoever to be able to speak about this subject?
Okay, so I have a master's degree in counseling. In our state, the way licensure goes, I'm not a licensed professional counselor. I'm a licensed school counselor. And so there were two different educational tracks. But for a while, I practiced as a therapist in a community mental health agency, which I can do with the certifications that I have. And so not only that, but I've also taught psychology, interviewing and counseling, advanced interviewing and counseling, death and dying, human sexuality, theories of personality. I've taught those for a number of years, undergraduates, and I've actually taught some graduate school courses too on lifespan development and then and ethics as well. So I've taught classes in the counseling field for a number of years. And not only that, but I've worked as a therapist, and I am a school counselor, a licensed school counselor.
So I hear this all the time whenever a psychic is doing something that would say is manipulative, and we call them grief vampires, and exploitive. They say, but they're being helped. You're giving them hope. You're giving them, why would you want to dash their hopes, and why would you want to take that away from them? And why would you want to, you awful skeptics, you're so mean, and your little dog too.
They're happy now, and you want them to be happy, right?
Well, yeah, I thought I wanted people to be happy, but That argument we get all the time is that they are cheap alternative to therapy. You can get an appointment with a psychic pretty easily and they will sit and talk with you. Isn't it kind of the same thing as talking to your great aunt Louisa or your best friend, and they're going to give you some good advice? Explain that to me in the limited amount of time we have.
Okay, so if you look at it, they're happy now, but happiness isn't the goal. Wellness is the goal. If you are happy all the time, there's something wrong. No one is happy all the time. No one is sad all the time. There's a normal range of emotions that you fluctuate between those. Now, if you stay low for an extended period of time, and to the point where it is depression, major depression, to the point where it's a continual battle for you, that's an issue. And you say, okay, so you go to a therapist. If the person is suffering from unresolved grief, then they stay in this low emotional range. Someone goes to a psychic and they get this little blip of happiness. Okay, that's great for that moment, but has that contributed to that person's overall wellness? Did that psychic give that person coping skills to deal with issues where they're going to fall back into that state of depression? And will they then know what to do? Will they recognize it coming on? Will they know what to do? Emotional wellness is the key. You can give someone, a cocaine addict, cocaine, and they will feel better for a while. But did you really help them? And the answer is no, you didn't. You've given them a false sense of happiness, or a false sense of that good feeling that they would get from that. But you haven't helped them at all.
This is wonderful. I'm writing some of this down. I guess when you think about this issue and separate the fact that psychics are not communicating with the dead or they're not seeing your future, let's just put that to the side, that they are, that's not true. And focus just on the idea that they're giving therapy to people, like, because they're having somebody to talk to and it's inexpensive, and getting an appointment's pretty darn easy with these psychics you can find everywhere. Really, what we're talking about here is that these people are not trained to be able to handle situations that can get really dicey really quickly.
Right. But the point of therapy in our modern evidence-based perception is not more therapy. It's to discharge the person from therapy. And so when someone would come to see me, my goal wasn't to keep them forever. My goal was to try to get them to be able to do things and exist and deal with their emotions and have their coping skills to do all these things without me. And again, the goal is still discharge. The goal is still to have that person to function at a higher level of functionality than when they came to see you. It's not, I'm going to keep that person coming back forever and ever to get their hit off of me. The goal is the same. You identify the issue, you help the person, and hopefully get them to not need you anymore.
Right. Well, Daniel, this has been fascinating. I'm having these conversations with people like yourself really helps me a lot, because as I'm understanding it, we need to disassociate in some ways the harm that psychics do in pretending to be counselors versus the harm they do when they say that they're communicating with dead people, which obviously isn't happening. Those are kind of two separate things. Where can people find out more about you, and where can they reach out to you?
Folks can find me at www.danielareed.com, or they can reach out. There's info at West Virginia Skeptics Society.com, or you can find us on our Facebook group, because I try to post something new there every day, and something in the skeptical vein every day for folks that would be interested in perusing that. So if you want to find me, I'm pretty easy to find.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
You're quite welcome.
Adrian.
Hi, Susan. Out for some shopping, eh?
Yep, I'm stocking up on this imitation maple syrup from Australia.
Imitation? Imitation? No. You need to buy the real thing from Canada.
But I saw the TV commercial, and it said that noted pancake-eating expert Richard Saunders says it's the best maple syrup money can buy, and 60% of people preferred it in a blind taste test. Everyone knows it's the best.
Oh, come on, Susan. You know better than that. That's the argument from authority.
It is?
Or is it the argument from popularity? It might be another logical fallacy. I'm not sure.
Really? If only we had a way of finding out.
Hello, everyone.
Oh my, it's the skeptical fairy godmother angel from the internet.
Yes, that's right. But how did you know who I am?
I listened to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Also, didn't you used to be the tooth fairy?
Oh, yes. I remember you. I'll never forget your left upper lateral incisor. Would you like it back?
No, it's okay. You keep it.
Hey, skeptical fairy godmother angel, what are you doing here in the supermarket?
I've come to tell you that you can find out about 40 different logical fallacies on YouTube in one handy location. Listen to each one to hear an explanation and examples of how they might be used.
Oh.
Just go to tinyurl.com/logicalzone and you'll find all the logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma with handy time codes to get to the exact one you want.
Who is Michelle Bickersma?
Oh, just a friend of mine.
tinyurl.com/logicalzone. Thank you, skeptical fairy godmother angel. I guess you'll disappear in a puff of smoke and thunder now, eh?
Not quite yet. I have a bit of shopping to do. Susan?
Yes?
Where do I find the Australian maple syrup?
What? No. Come with me, so-called skeptical fairy. This is real maple syrup from Canada. Made with real maple.
Once again to dive back into the pages of Trove and associated digital archives, mainly at trove.nla.gov.au, but sometimes and today a little bit further afield. Today, lots of clippings or some clippings from the State Library of New South Wales together with Trove. And of course, both these places are wonderful resources for digitised and microfilm. Newspapers in Australian history. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Don Lane, the Don Lane Show, and we mentioned that he would have on various so-called psychics and paranormal people. And one of the people that he helped bring to prominence in Australia was Doris Stokes. Now, she did the stock standard cold reading / hot reading stage readings for the audience psychic routine, pretending that she could contact dead people. And of course, over the years there have been so many people like Alison Devoir, who claim to be able to help police solve crimes. In Australia we have such people as Anne in the past, Bridget Lewis, who I think we'll be discussing on another episode, David Thompson, Deb Webber, Debbie Malone, Florence King, Georgina Walker, Greg Riley, Jason McDonald, Jeanette Wilson, Kerry Culkins, Lisa Williams, Lizzie Rose, Margaret Birkin, Margaret Dent, both of whom I saw live on stage, Mitchell Coombs, Rose Smith, Ruth Phillips. I appeared on a TV show with her 5 or 6 years ago, and I offered her the Australian Skeptics $100,000 and she turned it down point blank. Well, there you go. Sally Morgan, Scott Russell Hill, Talia, Tom Wards, Tony Riley, Val Hood, the amazing Valda. The list is extensive. People doing more or less the same routine, standing up in front of an audience and claiming to get messages from the dead. But Doris Stokes certainly made an impact in the, the late 1970s to the early 1980s. And let's go and see what it says about her at Wikipedia. Doris May Fisher Stokes, January 1920 to May 1987, born Doris Sutton, was a British spiritualist, professional medium and author. Her professed ability to communicate with the dead, public performances, television appearances, and memoirs made her a household name in Britain, and quite well known here in Australia too. During her lifetime, she was a controversial figure, with some believing her to possess psychic abilities, but investigations published after her death demonstrated that she had used techniques including cold reading, hot reading, and planting accomplices in her audience, giving the appearance of having paranormal abilities. So we scroll down to the section in question: criticism, debunking, and accusations of fraud. Stokes was accused of using various forms of deception to achieve the effects of communicating with the dead. These included cold reading, eavesdropping, and planting accomplices in the audience. It's a very good point to make. It has certainly been known in the past that certain people pretending to be psychic would have accomplices eavesdropping in the foyer of a theatre, for example, overhearing conversations people might be having, like, "Oh, I hope that the psychic can contact my grandmother Mary," or something like that. Evidence of audience plans. Stokes' death coincided with the publication of Catholic author Ian Wilson's 1987 book, The After-Death Experience, in which he presented a detailed expose of her methods. He described her as providing, quote, "slick, surefire answers," end quote, to questions of life after death. He attended one of Stokes' Palladium performances in November 1986, not long before she died, when she claimed to contact the dead relatives of 4 consecutive audience members with a sequence of convincing and poignant details. However, when the participants were questioned after her performance, it turned out that each of them had been invited by Stokes. The manager of the Palladium explained that Stokes routinely booked the front 3 rows of the theatre for her own use. Those contacted included a young woman called Dawn. She was given a message, supposedly, from her husband who had died less than a month earlier, telling her that he supported her decision to turn off his life support machine. However, when hospital nurses had asked her whether she would like to speak to anybody about this decision, she had asked to speak to Doris Stokes. Stokes had spoken to Dawn by telephone, offering commiseration and asking to be updated with the results of the tests that would determine whether Dawn's husband lived or died. In 1987, Dawn described a number of personal details which Stokes had given unprompted to her mother on the phone. While Dawn found these convincing, Wilson suggests that Stokes obtained them from Dawn's aunt, a prominent local spiritualist. And there are some more references and reports here. During the second half of the performance, members of the audience were chosen apparently at random. Wilson described this post-interval performance as, quote, much less convincing, relying on intelligent guesswork and fishing, end quote. In her book, Voices in My Ear, Stokes claimed that she had solved 2 murder cases in England. However, Detective Chief Superintendent Wilfred Brooks of the Lancashire Constabulary stated that Stokes made no contribution whatsoever to the detection of either murderer. And that's a very interesting list of reports there. I won't bother linking to that in this week's show notes. You can easily just go to Wikipedia and look up Doris Stokes to see that for yourself. But let's see what references, what clippings and so on we can find in the pages of Australian newspapers going back many years. And here's an advertisement with a beaming picture of Doris Stokes. Michael Edgley, International Proprietary Limited, and Kevin Jacobson, concert promoters, present Doris Stokes with Kevin Arnett. Now, we talked about Kevin Arnett a few weeks ago when we were discussing the Don Lane Show. Dallas Brooks Hall tomorrow at 3 p.m. Door sales available. Book now. Maya Celebrity and Center Entertainment. Open till 7 p.m. Quote, "Is there life after death? Question mark, end quote." And we have a story from the Sydney Morning Herald, dated August the 10th, 1980. Knock, knock. It's only dear Doris. And again, a picture of a beaming Doris Stokes. If the eye is looking somewhat haunted, blame Doris Stokes, the British housewife who says she's psychic. And I think the eye must be the column. Not that the eye believes her claims that she's in touch with those who are, as she coyly puts it, spirit-wide. Or maybe that's a misprint, maybe that should be spirit-side. It's hard to believe that anyone could, after her performance on Don Lane's Monday night show. In an entertainment industry blighted by some really abysmal acts, hers was the penultimate performance. To put it another way, it was all about scraping the bottom of the showbiz barrel. But difficult as it is, just suppose for a moment that Doris could indeed chat up the dear departed. There you are at last, in a life hereafter where you could hang up a "Do Not Disturb" sign and indeed rest in peace. But just as you're settling down for the eternal kip in some quiet, shady spot, who should appear but Doris, playing her version of "Knock Knock, Who's There?" It's a shattering thought, and one that's been giving the eye nightmares all week. Not a glowing report there. Now here's a very short bit concerning Doris Stokes in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 25th of November 1979. And the whole story revolves around hunting for the Yorkshire Ripper. The Yorkshire Ripper, all those years ago in England, who was terrorising Yorkshire. His name was Peter Sutcliffe. And of course he was caught in 1981, I seem to be seeing here, as I quickly look over to Wikipedia. A list of his attacks ranged from 1969, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1978 and 1979, 1980, and it finally says on the 2nd of January 1981, Sutcliffe was stopped by the police with a 24-year-old prostitute in the driveway, and it looks like, yes, he was brought to justice, arrested in 1981. Now, it's important to remember that at the time that Doris Stokes gave her impressions, which I'll get to in a second, Peter Sutcliffe was roughly 32 or 33. Now, his appearance, he was 5'8" and had dark collar-length hair and a beard. And I mention all this because the story is about the police looking for the Yorkshire Ripper. But right at the end, there's an artist's impression of somebody who looks completely different, a fair-haired man with no beard and completely different facial structure. And the little caption says, "Clairvoyant Mrs. Doris Stokes' impression of what the Yorkshire Ripper might look like. She says He is aged about 32, which more or less he was, stands 5 feet 8, which apparently he did, and is named Johnny or Ronnie. So it's interesting that the picture looks like somebody completely different. The name is nowhere near, but the age and the height were about right. But of course, that was absolutely no help to the investigation. Now, I've read this out before a few weeks ago, however, here it is again. And this is from the Canberra Times, dated the 12th of May 1987, London, Monday, Associated Press. Doris Stokes, 67. This is quite young, isn't it? Who attracted large audiences for her demonstrations of clairvoyance, died on Saturday in Wellington Hospital. Her family said today she had been receiving treatment for a cancerous brain tumour, which is naturally a sad state of affairs. Stokes claimed to be able to pass on messages from the dead and was widely popular in Britain, where she could pack theatres, even selling out the 2,325-seat London Palladium. She appeared on television in the United States and Australia. Now, I mentioned that death notice because here in the Canberra Times, dated the 21st of June 1987, in a little column called By the Way, it says, "There is mischief in the wording of an obituary in the new edition of the Canberra Skeptic, journal of the ACT branch of the Australian Skeptics, an organisation whose members devote themselves to mocking assertions about paranormal powers. Quote, the psychic community was shocked to learn, end quote, the obituary says, quote, of the death of British clairvoyant and medium Doris Stokes, who died unexpectedly on May 9, 1987, end quote. And that received a follow-up on the 25th of June 1987, Skeptics deny mocking. Sir, Australian Skeptics is an organisation devoted to the critical examination of claims about psychic, paranormal and similar phenomena. Skeptics don't, quote, devote themselves to mocking assertions about paranormal powers, end quote, as you assert. By the way, Canberra Times, June 21. Anyone who would like to evaluate the fairness of this charge is invited to examine the evidence. Copies of The Canberra Skeptic can be obtained on request from P.O. Box 107 Campbell. The death of the notorious medium and clairvoyant Doris Stokes was certainly noteworthy for being unheralded. Now, if you're interested, I noticed there's a YouTube documentary about Doris Stokes. If you just go to YouTube and type in Doris Stokes, you'll discover that. But what I don't have many clips at all of her on the Don Lane Show. Doris Stokes, one of a gaggle, a long line of mostly forgotten cold readers, stage psychics and whatnot. We have plenty of them in Australia, and there always will be plenty of them. Once people pick up the routine, one way or another, there's always a ready audience. But you too can find out about cold readers and hot readers and warm readers and reading in bed or whatever you want to do when you visit the pages of Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, or you visit your local library. Who knows? Maybe they have digitized newspapers for you to peruse as well. Because when you do that, you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week, and I look forward very much in a little while, after I edit this show and put it out, to seeing you at the Berkeley Public Library, today being Saturday, here in California, at 1 p.m. for my talk about how to make a skeptical podcast. I'm sure I'll be seeing lots of old friends there later today. Coming up next week on the show, the interview I will be conducting with Dr. Eugenie Scott as a live demonstration of how to do a podcast. Also in the Trove segment, even more psychics. Can we get enough of psychics? I don't know. We'll be looking at references to more psychics next week in the Trove segment. And finally, a big shout out to my teacher friends who have recently gone back to teach. And I notice that more and more the fact that less people are teaching and people are leaving the teaching profession is really starting to make an impact on those teachers still sticking with it. And I don't need to tell you, it's one of the most important jobs anyone can do. A good teacher can set somebody up for life. It is vital work, and well, I for one in the Skeptic Zone appreciate each and every one of you who go out there and face those children every week to teach. But for this week, from the Oakland, downtown Oakland, looking out of my window, it's nice and sunny with a slight breeze. This is Richard Saunders signing off.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to those people who listen after the music for the dice game. I've moved over to the other side of the room. I've just bought myself in a thrift store for $5 a Google Mini. I've never had one before. It's about the size of a donut and it's pink-ish. I had a bit of trouble setting it up because my phone was on a different region, but we finally got there. So we'll use this device to play the dice game. This is where each week or many weeks I roll a die, and you have to use your psychic powers to guess the answer. This time we'll ask this device. Now to trigger it, I have to say special words, as you know, and I'll edit those out so your device at home isn't playing along, or maybe it should. No, I won't do that. Here we go. So let's roll a 10-sided die via this device. Roll a 10-sided die.
You got 2.
2. All right, that's the first number this week is 2. Let's try it again. Roll a 10-sided die.
It's 6.
6. 2, 6. All right. And the final number this week, roll a 10-sided die.
You got 8.
2, 6, and 8. A definite pattern going there. Let's do a supplementary. We'll make it out of 30, just for the hell of it. Roll a 30-sided die.
I can only roll dice with 3 to 20 sides.
Well, that's disappointing. All right. Oh, in that case, we should make it a 20-sided die. Roll a 20-sided die.
You rolled 14.
14.